Um, there we go, that's it recording there. So a warm welcome to you to the second of our Climate Action Roundtables this week. We had quite an in-depth discussion yesterday on business travel, and we'll be focusing on Scope 3 emissions today. So again, another interesting conversation in store for us. As we wait for Rebecca, it'd be fantastic if we just go around the group for some very quick introductions, just to share your name, your role, and also your institution as well, because I see we've got some kind of new faces this week. So I'll just kind of go down the list. If we can maybe start off with Laura and then Ines.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Laura Brossico. I work at the UNICA Secretariat since 2017, and together with Vicky, I am one of the contact person for the UNICA Green and SDGs working group. Welcome from UNICA.
Thanks.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Ines. I work at ULB, so University of Brussels. I'm a project manager at the environmental office. And I work on the climate action plan and also on the monitoring side. And I'm sorry, but I can just stay 1 hour.
No problem at all. Thank you very much, Ines, and thank you so much for facilitating yesterday's session as well. On to Julia and then Katrine.
Hi, I'm Julia. I work as Sustainability Coordinator at the University of Vienna, and I just started in July 2021. Thank you.
Thanks, Julia. On to Katrine.
Hi, my name is Katrine. I work at Vrije Universiteit in Berlin, and I'm also responsible for sustainability management there, especially for international relations in that field, but also for strategic projects like our climate emergency declaration. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katrine. And on to Laurent and then to Bjorn.
Hello, Laurent Bétrier from the University of Luxembourg. I'm responsible for the sustainable development at the university, and so in charge of developing a strategic approach, policies, and analysis for the management, and of course for everybody.
And I'm Weber Bakken from the University of Oslo. I'm heading UIO Energy, which is a strategic initiative on sustainable energy and the energy transition. We mostly deal with research, a bit of education, but I've also been heavily involved in this integrated climate and environmental strategy at the University of Oslo, which I'll say a few words about later, I think. And I've also been slightly involved in the greenhouse gas emission inventories from 2018 onwards. Not really in the nitty-gritty details, but sort of overarching. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And on to Vicky.
Hello, everyone. I'm Vicky. I also work for the UNICA Secretariat, as Laura has already mentioned, as a project officer. Welcome to you, or welcome all of you.
Thank you so much, Vicky. And now I'm going to hand over to Rebecca, who's kindly offered to facilitate today's session. Rebecca, over to you.
Thank you so much, Matthew, for taking over the introduction. I had laptop issues. So I've had to switch off laptop, so I don't have my presentation with me anymore because it's on my broken laptop. So I'll need to check the agenda for today. I've sent to you earlier this morning. Yeah, so we've already had an introduction. We know each other's function. And I'm Rebecca Lefevere. I'm sustainability coordinator at the VUB strategic department. And now actually one of the projects I'm working on is the coordination of a climate action plan. And in this framework, it was for me also personal, very useful to facilitate this session and to exchange the lesson learned and the challenges we meet while designing our climate action plan at our universities. If I understood well, we could already exchange in which function we work on climate action, but we could not define yet in which stage we are. Am I right? Okay, so maybe we are only 9 in the meeting. I'll start from the highest or the furthest in the process, who has already targets set for scope 1, 2, and 3, and who is already monitoring the progress of the university towards these targets. Is there already one of your universities in that stage? Yeah, wow, Oslo, congratulations, and Edinburgh. Okay, well, it would be a pleasure to learn more about your challenges you met and the targets you are heading for. And yeah, in between, our university has already set a first benchmark for a baseline for a carbon footprint. We have already done a first measurement with setting targets on scope 1 and 2, for example. Is somebody in that case? Yeah, Berlin. Yeah, that indeed. Yeah, perfect. And you are now in Berlin working on scope 3 too, or starting on scope 3, or how far are you there?
So we're in different stages of data collection in different fields. We're quite comfortable with scope 1 and 2, and started business travel analysis. But with the wider scope 3, we have not yet started, and are just in the process of really seeing what other universities are doing in that field, because we feel we do not have to invent the wheel. So that exchange is quite useful in that area.
That's true. So you've picked some priority fields, some priority impact categories, and then instead of going for the full scope 3 picture. That's also a good approach. Maybe you should have done that one at VB too. Is there anyone else? Ines, I think you were also a bit in that.
Yeah, it's a bit similar to Berlin. We picked the actions and we set targets for the actions and not for the whole scope.
Okay,
And
but
so
you have already concrete targets at ULB.
Yeah, we have a target like minus 14% in 2030 compared to 2018 for the set of actions that we decided are a priority, and it's already quite a challenge for our university to get there. And we hope that as we move on with the actions that are a priority, we can set further targets. But we took an approach that is more, how can I say, flexible, because yeah, we thought it was not appropriate for us like to see the big picture, but instead we prefer to target some specific things and start to implement, which is quite a challenge. But yeah.
Yeah, I already hear 2 different approaches of the process of making a climate action plan. That's also very interesting to exchange on. And in Vienna, how far in which stage are you in the process?
So in Vienna, we have the overall goal of climate neutrality until 2030, which is really ambitious for us. But unfortunately, we don't have specific goals yet for scope 1, 2, or 3. So it's just the overall goal. But I think we have still to define the specific goals for each scope. And for us, we are quite good when it comes to scope 1 and part of scope 2 emissions. So all about energy, electricity, and heating. We have quite a good database, but when it comes to scope 3, we are still in the process of finding our way how to collect the data. So for mobility, we have a survey running just now until the end of the week, actually, and then we will have some data on mobility. But a thing that's really open for me is purchasing, so materials like paper and IT. So I'd be interested in hearing what other universities are doing in terms of finding scope 3 emissions, and who is responsible at your university? Because I'm the sustainability coordinator, but I always struggle in finding where can I get the data, who's it gonna put it into the carbon footprinting. So I'd really like to know how you organize maybe your carbon footprinting as well. So how do you, or what do you include in scope 3, and how actually do you organize the process of your carbon footprinting? Maybe that's an interesting topic for today as well.
Indeed. Collection. I'm just noting down the questions, indeed. So it's also more about the process. I think Laurent Bertry, we haven't heard from. Luxembourg.
We are at the beginning of the climate journey, so we are in the middle of our carbon footprint analysis. I'm working with a student from a master in sustainable development, so giving a job and trying also to use his technical experience. We are almost done with the energy. One of our issue is that we do not own the building, so it's we have to go through providers. In fact, it's provided for free by a state agency, and they do not really care about carbon footprinting, so it's difficult to get information behind the curtain. And we are at the moment working on business travel. We discussed that yesterday, so it's a massive issue for us to find data because it's line by line. We don't have a travel agency, at least a dedicated and mandatory one, and we will use a monetary approach for purchase of goods and services, and of course we will work on capital items. This is where we define our scope. Again, it's a 6 months endeavor for the students in the first time, so we learn as we work, and of course data is a big issue and responsibility. I agree also, it's difficult. What we of course hope is that with this first exercise that we will define a process and make sure that people gather data on a regular basis so that we can update our analysis, and of course by saving time we'll go deeper.
Yeah, that sounds indeed. I think we've heard everyone. No, Matthew, sorry. No, you were indeed at Edinburgh. You were already having a climate action plan and monitoring your progress. Is that correct?
Yeah, I can maybe say a few words, Rebecca, from Edinburgh's point of view. So in 2016, we published a climate strategy, which highlighted the ambition to be carbon neutral by 2040. Now that looked at scope 1, scope 2 and some scope 3. And what we included within scope 3 back in 2016 was obviously waste, water, business travel. They were included in the target. What was measured but not used in target setting back in 2016 was commuting, because we felt we didn't have direct control over that, and also procurement, so looking at the goods and the services that we purchase. I mentioned yesterday that we're about to start a new review of our climate strategy to bring it up to date, and those scope 3 elements, including commuting and procurement, I think will now be included within the target setting. So not only will we measure them, but they'll be part of this net zero target. We've done a bit of work over the last year on better understanding our carbon footprint from goods and services. We've used a tool called HESCET. That's the Higher Education Supply Chain Emission Tool. And that was developed by the higher education sector and the procurement sector within the UK. And what that does, that's a spend-based tool. And over the last 3 years, they had carbon factors for about 70 spend categories. That has now increased to over 300 different spend categories. So we've done some kind of analysis. We've looked at our data, and from that tool, our annual kind of scope 3 emissions were sitting around 140,000 tonnes, and that was annually between 2017 and 2020, which really dwarfs our kind of scope 1 and scope 2. footprint. There's definitely inaccuracies in that data because we collect our own business travel from travel management companies, and there is definitely a difference of about 10 to 15% in terms of what the tool generates for that. So obviously, you know, there's issues around its accuracy, but it gives us a really good ballpark figure. And what it has done is allow us to identify, okay, looking at the category spend, what are the big hitters? So looking at estates, looking at IT, where can we actually make a difference and engage with suppliers to help kind of reduce our carbon footprint? So I would say we've made some progress. Scope 3 is very much under our overall target. And just now, as we begin this review of our new climate strategy, we'll have specific targets for Scope 1, 2, and Scope 3.
Congratulations, that's super ambitious. Mm-hmm. And from Ms. Fabio from Oslo, could you explain a little more shortly in which detail you already go in your Scope 3?
Yeah, I can try to explain. I would, and I said that we have targets. I'm actually lying a little bit there because we have a university board meeting next week, and then this hopefully will be approved, and we will have specific targets. But we've been discussing this for quite a while. I think it this work here that goes back many years when there was a lot of focus on the buildings and emissions related to that, and then we started sort of a new era in this, I think, when Oslo was the European Green Capital in 2019, because then we decided we have to, you know, get this properly done and get a full overview of what we are emitting. And then we did the first greenhouse gas emission accounting, taking into account all 3 scopes, 1, 2, and 3, trying to do this as honestly as possible, but also, as I guess everyone realizes here, you have to set some borders around this. And that is, of course, the discussion, and there's there's no right and wrong answer in this. You just have to be very clear where you are putting those borders. So, for example, Edvard mentioned this daily commute and so on. That is not included in what we have. But I think most of the people going to the university, well, now mostly at home still, but when they are going to the university, it's mostly public transport by far. So the emissions are quite low related to that. We have a very limited number of parking spaces, and now actually most of those cars are also electric vehicles. So I don't think it's a huge thing we're missing there. What we have not included is canteens and student housing, because that is a separate foundation, so we don't really have directly access to all those numbers and so on. That would increase our emissions quite a bit if we had included that. And then the final thing that we have discussed a bit, that's more of kind of a minor thing, but we have, for example, fuel stations that are using fuels for snowmobiles and for ATVs and so on. But that's kind of share infrastructure with other universities in Norway. And then it's quite difficult to decide, you know, where do you assign what. So that is also left out at the moment. But we have a Scope 3 now that focuses on economic data, except for air travel and energy as well. There's a physical data. And I guess this is probably something all of you have experienced as well, because we saw in 2018 and 2019, we just looked at economic data, and it looked like the emission related to air travel had dropped by about 20%. And this was sort of, you know, yay, we've done this, great job. And when you start looking into the physical data of this, you realize that we'd actually traveled more. So it had gone up in 2019, but we had got better deals on air travel. So, I mean, this is one of the major things, being honest here and actually getting as much physical data as possible. And then we see the same thing, for example, with chemicals. It's really, really difficult because it's just one factor. Chemicals is this huge bag of things, and it's just everything mixed together. So, I mean, you can have really expensive chemicals that doesn't really have huge emissions connected to them. And it's just the amount of money. It's categorized the same way as, say, if you buy methane gas and just let it out in the lab, that is actually very cheap and emissions are low. So that's kind of the wall that we hit at the moment, I think, and trying to decide where to go into more detail in terms of this and getting more realistic numbers. Because it's really just, you know, money multiplied by some factors that are a bit random.
Yeah, we're experiencing the same at VUB. we are indeed, we tried to go quite a lot in detail from our first carbon footprint in 2016. And there we immediately took business travel into it, commuting, because we have, in Belgium, we have a legislation that you have to do a mobility survey of your staff and students every 3 years. So we had already quite some data. So there we could easily start. And procurement, we've taken bit by bit, because indeed, as everybody said, that's procurement. That's what to take into your scope, what not to take, how to get data, and how to decide on which actions are you going to take, and how are you going to measure the impact of your actions. That's also a big struggle we are facing. What we learn now, we've changed methodology. So we've used the French framework, the ADME, the Bilan Carbone framework. And now we are switching to science-based targets to also align with the net zero targets. And there we learned that we will have to work on our capital goods, on our estates, much more in detail. Because in the previous methodology, we just took the square meters and an impact factor, and then we, how do you say, depreciated over 40 years, because it took us 40 years to renovate. After 40 years, the building was renovated. Now in our new methodology, we have to calculate the impacts the moment you build the building. So there, this year we've gathered our data of our baseline 2019 of our financial department, but you just have a huge Excel of spendings, but you know nothing about which kind of materials. Is it paint? Is it electricity? Is it concrete? So it's really a black box, the estate thing, and it will probably be our main emission category in 2019. So is there already anyone of you working on estate level, for example? Not yet. I learned this morning that apparently the rail operator in Belgium, Infrabel, so the infrastructural company, they are in the public procurement, they're asking that all the entrepreneurs, that they really give data about the amount of concrete used, the amount of iron used when building infrastructure for that railway operator. I only learned that an hour ago in another workshop. Are there any examples you know in your country? Or I see Matthew, and do I explain it, pronounce it right, Fabian?
Fabian is good.
Oh, perfect. Okay, I see you have some ideas. Go ahead.
Yeah, I can start there. I certainly don't have the solutions. This is something we're struggling with as well, how to include this, because now in scope 3, we include anything that has to do with maintenance of buildings and so on. But we're going to build a new life science building. It has just started. And we're going to spend like 1 billion euros on this. Really huge building, many square meters. It will demand a lot of energy. It will demand a lot of materials and so on. This is being done by, it's kind of a special state entrepreneur that does this. And then university gets the building afterwards when they are finished. And so we don't really have, we're not doing the procurement as such. It's paid by the government budget, and then we get the building. We sort of get the key when it's finished. But how do we sort of calculate this into a scope 3 budget? We don't know. So we have to make some decisions how to do this. So it's quite clear that the energy we use and the maintenance and so on, that will be included. But how should we include this building? That will hopefully be there for more than 40 years, I hope. Probably 50 or 100 years. How to divide that by years. And for now, we just said that, okay, we're not including this big building. So we have included other projects that have been done. They are included in scope 3, but not this big building. It's kind of the elephant in the room for us, to be honest.
And Matthew?
Yeah, just on the back of that, just in terms of the national context that we operate in Edinburgh, so the Scottish Government requires all public bodies to produce an annual climate change report that outlines their total carbon footprint, the measures they are taking to reduce that footprint, and also their kind of wider influence in terms of adaptation and wider influence in society. That's been in place for about 5 years now, and they are coming forward with more changes to that for the next year, and one of those changes is specifically looking at scope 3 with a very keen eye on construction. The reason they're doing that is to make sure that the public sector are aligning with the Scottish Government's ambition to be carbon neutral by 2045, but also there's legislation coming through about public buildings being net zero carbon in terms of new builds, and looking at very, very strict standards when it comes to refurbishments as well. So there's definitely external factors that's driving us to look at this area. But even though they're doing that, I don't think there's a silver bullet. I mean, you know, the tool that I highlighted there, I mean, accuracy, there's question marks over that because it's a spend-based tool. Even though, you know, they're significantly increasing the amount of kind of carbon factors they're using for spend categories. So what we have done in the interim is try to really engage with our construction companies, you know, the main players that we use to see whether through tenders or whether through working directly with companies that we use frequently, if we can embed carbon and sustainability measures. That has been so far very enlightening. I would say the construction companies that we're engaging with are further ahead than us. As I would say, the public sector, when it comes to this, they're already thinking about these measures, they're already embedding them in their kind of processes. But we just don't have the tools at our disposal to get an accurate figure in terms of carbon emissions. So for us, it's about engaging with suppliers, but going back to my original point, there's definitely external factors and drivers forcing us to really look at scope 3, in particular construction, over the next year in Scotland.
Interesting insights. Thank you. Yeah, maybe I just also started with one of the hardest categories in scope 3, the capital goods and the buildings. But it's because I didn't know, Ines, did you go more in detail in the session in business travel on the data collection of business travel and possible actions? Because if we discuss this here, then we maybe do things double that has already been discussed. Your microphone is
sorry. We discussed it was a challenge to find the data for travel. We didn't go into the detail of how to improve the collection or so usually if you don't have any system in place, it's usually you have to get through the financial data, and then it's a lot of work. The other universities have already an agency, a travel agency that collects the information for them. So yeah, but maybe you can leave this for the end, because it was something we didn't go into detail, but at least we talked about it. So I don't know.
Yeah, perfect. Is there anyone who has a category he or she prefers to start with in scope 3?
I just wanted to relate to estates that what Björn also mentioned, and also Matthew, is that we have the same issue regarding a building that will be provided for free by our government. So they design, they buy, and after that they give. They even do not rent. And so we will include that later on when we have information, but what we plan to do is really to engage with the constructor and try to get more information about materials used, try also to push them to think themselves in terms of carbon footprint of their construction, so that we can use this information. And the second point is that we are lucky to share the campus with a research institute, and is there one of their research is based on product life cycle, and in fact they do a lot about that, and we will share a building in some point, and so we will of course use them also to get an understanding of how they plan to get the data and include that in their own footprint, carbon footprint, so that we can also replicate. So we hope to get knowledge from those who are really well, because they deliver this kind of services also to private companies.
Sorry, on capital goods. Is there anyone who would like to exchange on ICT? Yeah, sorry, I see two hands, Matthew and Björn. Yeah, Matthew, you can go first.
Yeah, it was just a comment, just going back to construction. As I said, we were reviewing our climate strategy shortly and looking at specific targets for Scope 3. But I think one of the challenges with that is looking at the disruption from COVID. We've had a significant downturn in our kind of capital investment program across the estate. So, we've got data for 2017 to 2020. We're about to take a look at more recent data from then. But in terms of actually trying to target set and make targets, that's quite tricky, because certainly I don't know, and colleagues don't know how that's going to rebound after the pandemic, whether we'll see the same levels of investment and ambition in our kind of capital project for the estate. So I think that's maybe one thing that certainly I've talked with colleagues about in other universities in Scotland, just in terms of, do we have confidence enough to actually be making long-term targets, or do we have to wait out a couple of years just to see how, especially with construction, whether it rebounds? Because as I said, we've experienced a massive downturn, and I don't know if that's going to be at the same levels as previously.
And Björn? Well, you don't have to raise hands, you can just start talking, because otherwise I have to look all the time if there are hands.
I have a few slides as well, just showing how we've divided this into scopes and so on. So I'm not sure if this is the right time to show that, but I could comment on what Matthew is saying. We have had this same discussion as well. So we've decided to use 2018 as a reference point, because we think particularly 2020 and 2021 will be quite odd years. And then we're not quite sure about the rebound this year either. If things open up, will people just start flying all over the world to all these conferences that they missed? So maybe that's not very representative either. So we are thinking kind of a trajectory that starts from 2018 and goes to 2030, and then we expect quite a bit of noise on the way there. But I could perhaps just show a few slides, and maybe that is also some basis for discussion. So I think actually I'll just skip this. I think it's this more integrated climate and environment strategy that we've been working on, and it's up for approval in exactly 1 week in the board, and we assume it will go through. And in that strategy, we have set these specific goals. So an overall reduction of at least 50% by 2030, which is then divided in scope 1 and 2, where it's close to 90. So then we can talk about something close to climate neutral. But in scope 3, we can't really say that we are much more pessimistic, I would say. So we've modeled reduction by just 25%. And if you include all these 3 scopes, we can't really talk about climate neutrality. It's, there will be quite a bit of emissions related to scope 3. So we've done some simple modeling, and it's tried to show it in this graph here, where this is the overall emissions starting from 2018, which is then set to 100%, and trying to get down to 50% in 2029. And we think that it will be more and more difficult. So a lot of these reductions, it's a percentage from the previous year. So if you have, say, a 10% reduction from the previous year, it will go down slower and slower. And we think that is probably realistic. You see this kink here, that is basically a carbon capture and storage at the district heating plant in Oslo, which is planned. And that's not something that we control. So if that's not going through, and it looks like there will be at least some delay in this, it means that the emission related to district heating will still be quite a bit higher, and we will struggle to get down to this 50% by all means. And So again, as an example for air travel, or not air travel, travel in general. For example, we set a target here for 7% reduction per year compared to the previous year, indicating that it would be more and more difficult. And we specifically, we said this is the emissions that should be reduced. We're not saying anything about the travel. So it would be a mix of traveling less and trying to travel in a more environmental friendly way, not distinguishing between those. And as I mentioned, we did the first greenhouse gas emission accounting in 2018. We then also discovered that the data quality on this was quite poor from the economic data. So they did a major revision of this, and now we have numbers for 2018, 2019, and 2020. It's mostly economic data, but physical data for energy and air travel and a few other things, but mostly economic data. But now through more kind of a quality control that we had previously. Because you mentioned, for example, just paper as an example. When you go into the system, you find out that this office, just regular paper for printers and so on, that can end up anywhere. It can end up as chemicals, it can end up as office supplies, it can end up as office furniture, because the people entering this, it doesn't really matter for them. It's a bit random. So trying to kind of wash through this and trying to put things in the right place that is necessary to get something that is meaningful. Otherwise, it's basically just noise that they're measuring in terms of the difference from year to year. And just looking at the 2020 numbers, those are ready now. You can see scope 1, 2, and 3. Scope 1 is basically nothing. So it's almost no fuel use now. We had some boilers and so on previously. All that has been removed. So now it's just district heating and electricity, and that ends up in scope 2. So a little bit of fuel for some vehicles and so on, but that is mostly electrical vehicles as well now. We switched almost everything that is fossil-based at the university. And then scope 3 is more than half of it. And again, this is really an estimate, indicating with the decimal, it's kind of misleading. It's more than half is the right way to describe this. Looking at the categories, it looks like this. So you can see the energy is the scope 1 and 2, that is 44%. Buildings, that is maintenance and building materials and so on. It's not new buildings here in general. Because as I said, we don't know how to do that properly right now. Equipment, it's all kind of stuff you buy. So it's office furniture, it's ICT equipment and so on. Services, that also has an emission. So it's getting consultants in various ways. It's insurance, it's all kinds of this stuff. And then travel is just 6%, but then you really have to add that this is 2020. So in 2018, travel was like 20% of this budget. And I'm actually surprised that it's not less than 6%, the way we have now really traveled to minimal extent. And then the small category here, which is scientific equipment, it's a special thing that typically, some of it is built by yourself, some is bought through special procurement means and so on. So it's not kind of the stuff you buy off the shelf. It's special equipment. So that was just, to give an indication of what it looks like when you break it down. So again, if compared to the left slide, 44% is scope 1 and 2, the rest is scope 3, as we have broken it down in 2020. So that's just to give a rough idea how this looks at the University of Oslo. And your mileage might vary quite a bit, I think.
Super interesting, thank you. And also super ambitious. Good luck with the approval next week. What I didn't entirely get, so for scope 1 and 2, you have a minus 90% reduction target by 2030, but then it is mainly in the public heat network that the reductions will take place, or will you also work on the demand side at your buildings?
It will be a combination. So we have done quite a bit from, I would say, from 2016 and to 2018, we had like a 15% reduction of energy use, and then we're targeting another 30% from 2018 to 2030. But that will require some, it was mentioned here, investments. It will require investments. So there needs to be a will to do this. This is by no means automatic. But I would also say that we started out from using quite a bit of energy in the buildings and so on. So it's certainly possible to do a lot by making the buildings smarter, better control, not heating them at night, and so on. So there's still a lot of potential, and we roughly want to try to make them, well, I think it's 5 to 6% more energy efficient per year as we go ahead. Then we will reach that reduction. But part of this 90% reduction, that is related to the fact that the electricity that we buy, the factor or the emission factor related to that will go down quite dramatically. So for now, we've used quite a high factor to really highlight what is being done on the energy side. And I think towards 2030, we will use a more realistic factor, probably using the Nordic electricity mix as the target. But as Denmark, for example, is phasing out the coal plants, Norway is building out more wind, Sweden is building out more wind, Finland is making more nuclear power, and so on. The Nordic electric mix will be quite low on emissions as we reach 2030. So that is quite safe. And same thing, district heating, we have quite a high factor now, but that will also go down, and especially if we get carbon capture and storage going, which is planned in Oslo at the incineration plant there, emissions will go down dramatically for the district heating. So I think it's really an important thing here, that there's some factors that we control ourselves, and we can do things, we can invest and so on, but there's also a lot of factors that we don't control. And the total result here is, multiplying these two things together.
Thank you very much. That's indeed a good conclusion. Is there anyone who would like to react on scope 1 and 2, as we are now that in this scope, Katrien and Berlin, you're also quite ahead in those both scopes. Do you have targets there? Probably you do, of course. Sorry.
Yeah, we do have that. So we do have a lot of data when it comes to our vehicle fleet, for example, or also our fuel use. And there's also a program to have more electric vehicles on the campus. So we are refurbishing our complete vehicle fleet. So sizing it down on the one hand side, and then just having new vehicles that come in to be electric. Right, so this is one thing. Then we, in terms of energy efficiency, we have another 10% target. So in the past 20 years, we've reduced by 80% our emissions. And we want to up that again by 10% within the next 5 years. And this is going to be achieved by energy efficiency measures that we are planning. So we also want to extend our solar plants that we have on our roofs already, and we are going to have a big investment in that to have more. But there are also other measures in that field. And then, yeah, we have, also in the field of business travel, we have a reduction target of 50%, which is very ambitious. But as Vebjørn, we also are talking about the emissions and not about the number of travel. And we really looked into the data very thoroughly over the past years. But we also have the same struggles as other universities because we do not have a central booking agency. So for us, collecting the data is quite the hassle. And then Laurent mentioned it, going through those Excel sheets and identifying, okay, how did this travel go about? And then we actually, because we cannot see that from our data, we actually factored in if there has been a landing in between. So if it's not a direct flight, so we have a factor for that. to also really just be clear about, because you cannot go direct from Berlin to Vancouver, for example. So that's impossible. So you know that, so we factor that in. And so they're very different measures that we are taking in this climate emergency declaration that we are having. And I might not have been very clear about that in the beginning. So because we do have a neutrality target, which is super ambitious. So it's in 2025, we aim to be climate neutral. And that, of course, is not possible for all three scopes. So what we are doing is saying, okay, we are definitely doing this for scope 1 and 2 plus business travel, because this is where we actually have the reliable data. And then we have to work with compensation. And until that time, we are working on our scope 3 emissions. So we have a very good overview about waste management, for example, or water and everything. So that's quite clear to us, the database, and we also have extensive energy monitoring. But and this is something, maybe I'm also jumping to the beginning of the discussion here, but I feel everyone is mentioning right now, so we're all talking about scope 3, and I think we have a quite clear definition in our head, but maybe it would be useful for our discussion here between the 9 of us to again state like the big pillars of scope 3, because each and every one of us is kind of admitting on the way that we have to leave certain fields out. And maybe we can just put this in the chat, like the one general definition of scope 3, and then just see, okay, where are we able to go, and then just go through this list. I think I would find that helpful, because I'm trying to take notes here. Yeah.
Yes, sorry,
Can I just very quickly comment that we actually had the opposite problem, because we have a central procurement for travels. But the one that we had previously, it was impossible to divide this back into different units. So we just had to aggregate for the university as a whole, and that doesn't really help in terms of getting people to travel less if you can't, point and say that, these are the people that's traveling a lot. But then we changed our agent, and they got this as part of the procurement of the services, that we could break it down. That was really important.
This is an excellent comment. I mean, we are getting our data from the central department that does the accounting for travel. So because this is all done within our university, but due to data protection issues, we only get it by department. So we cannot pin it down to a single person. So we cannot do accusations or anything or rankings. So it's by department. In the end, I have to say it's still very useful for us to go to the departments and tell them, okay, that's how much you flew, that's how much you spent on that, that's coming from the university budget, that's coming from third-party funds and everything. So that's really helpful for the conversation to get it going. But yeah, we cannot go in depth like you would with the travel agency. Yeah.
But that said, we are also breaking it down to department and centers. Okay. We're not going beyond that. But I think when you get down to that level at the department, they have a pretty good idea who's traveling and not.
Oh, definitely.
Is it okay to focus now coming 10 minutes on business travel, maybe, as I think other people also looking for more details on business travel, on data collection? Is that okay for you? I just make a suggestion, and meanwhile I will type impact categories in the chat, and then we can go per category, then that we have more structure in the discussion. I had prepared a PowerPoint to get a structured discussion, but it's on my laptop that crashed at 1, so sorry. So I'll type it in the chat box, okay? But maybe Ines, is that okay for you to have the findings you learned yesterday in the session on business travel and data collection? We already heard here a framework agreement for business travel is already a big asset for data collection. Has there anyone already put targets per department, for example? Have you learned something about that yesterday?
Matthew, if you have your notes.
Okay.
I don't think we did get into the specifics of having targets, etc. But yeah, what can we say about that? So yeah, I think, yeah, as we said, there were two main ways of getting the data. It's really the financial data. And then the other one, having more detailed data going through another system, like, for example, an agency. And at ULB, for example, we are considering another system, which is going through an online platform where people do have to enter their travel for insurances purposes. And so it can be also another way to ask this information at some point. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so for example, I know that at Edinburgh, you did quite a lot of work regarding this data. I remember you had an online platform where you could see the data by faculty and department. So maybe it was a way for people to see which department or faculty was behind and where improvements could be done. I don't know if it worked or if...
It's a good question. Yeah, so at Edinburgh, I mean, we were in the situation previously where we had 3 external travel management companies, plus colleagues could book their business travel through expenses. So actually trying to calculate the overall carbon footprint from the university's business travel was an absolute nightmare. And bring it forward to now, we just have the one travel management company, and colleagues cannot claim travel on their expenses now, which has proved to be quite challenging. We've had quite a lot of internal resistance to that, but from a data point of view, it's absolutely fantastic. It's a lot more efficient as well. And what we do, we basically take the data from the travel management company, which is broken down, as Ines was highlighted, by academic school and unit, and we've put that on our website. So all staff and students can go on, they can look at the data, they can look at emissions, they can look at the mode of transport, they can look at the distance travelled. As well. And one thing through our new sustainable travel policy is, again, like many colleagues here have highlighted, again, a target to reduce the emissions from business travel. So we don't want to stop travel, but we want to promote more sustainable modes of business travel as well. And, you know, yesterday we talked not just about data, but the challenges around culture, senior management buy-in, communication with stakeholders, looking at engaging particularly with an academic audience as well. But I have to say, I mean, that took us a good 4 to 5 years, and it was quite a painful process as well, moving from almost the autonomy that individuals had to book to now a very centralised process, which almost goes against some of the culture at Edinburgh, because it is a very devolved institution in terms of autonomy across not just academic schools, but professional units as well. So again, there's a bit of tension there. And experiences and are going through the same experience elsewhere, but certainly talking with my colleagues in Scotland, there's definitely a move to centralise business travel in terms of using external management companies.
And also regarding the targets, there are 2 different approaches. One of the universities, for example, asks each department to set their own targets and to put their own measures. So you have like the top-down approach where it's overall target and yeah, it's something decided, let's say, by the board, and then you have another approach where each faculty or department can set its own targets and take the measures they think are necessary to reach the targets. So that was two types of approach that were also discussed yesterday.
It's very interesting. And Katrien, I was also wondering, in Berlin, how did you come to the 50% target? Was it indeed a bottom-up approach with all the ambitions of the separate departments, or is it a top-down decision?
If you want to, I can also very quickly share my screen and open up a presentation, which is in German, but which will help me to talk a little bit more guided. But it tells me that the screen sharing has been deactivated, so I cannot do it at the moment. But I can just start. So we have a business travel policy coming up at the moment, and it's a participatory top-down process, so to say. So we first, so you can see that here. So what we did first as the unit for sustainability, we really just did the data collection. So we saw that we have over 5,000 business travels per year, and 51% are by plane, 44% by train, and just about 5% by bus or a car. And then the majority of those flights took place within Europe, so like 2/3 of that. But they only make up 20% of the flight emissions that we are having. So in how you want to scale it, it really makes a difference. Whereas like long distance flights makes up 80% of our emissions. So the main issue, again, that we have in the discussion in Germany, and I think a lot of other universities also have that, is where does the money come from for the trips? Because when you want to have a policy on that or regulations, you also need to be able to have those regulations. And about 72% of our business travel is actually financed by third-party donors. So we have to oblige to their regulations also. So if we look at all of this for the flight data in 2018, 2019, we're talking about 1/3 of overall CO2 emissions for the university, as we get that. So if you see that, so here this is like district heating, the percentage only for campus, and the line below is for campus and business travel together. So we just concentrate on that, and I tell you what's up here. So district heating makes up 18%. Then we have gas, heating oil, electricity. That would be our vehicle fleet, and that's the total for the campus emissions that we are having. And then if we're adding business travel, just flights, it makes up 33% at the moment. And then, other business travel with train or bus accounts for 1.7%. So this is in terms of data what we are looking at. And then since Matthew also pointed to the difficulties of assessing that, it's the data, the number of travels that have been processed in our accounting department. So we also need to be aware of, sometimes they're slow. It could be that we have some data in 2018 for travels that have taken place in 2017. So we are trying to get this apart, but sometimes it's not so possible. So now talking about the policy, we are really trying to work with incentives here. And yes, we looked at the data, we looked at the possibilities that we are having. So what we want to do is decrease by 50%, really using hybrid and virtual communication formats, what we have learned in the past 2 years, essentially. So cutting down on this, and especially on short trips. So we also analyzed how long are trips, not just the number and the emissions, but also how long are they. And so you have a lot of board meetings, keynote speeches and stuff like that, where we just had the experience through the pandemic that it's possible to have this virtually. So we also want to increase service and training for that, because this is essential. It's just not the technique. Then we have first class for train use, and make it compulsory that people are using a decision tree and multiple choice to also, and they have to write a short text why they need to fly in case they want to fly. So this is what we worked at the unit for sustainability. And then we, now how do I stop this? Sorry. Yeah, so we try to, now this is gone right now. So we had this in our sustainability committee discussed, and so, then we took it to the executive board. They said, really approved that, we like that, but they made it compulsory for us to go through each and every department and leadership circle that we have in those different departments and introduce it there, get feedback. And so we did this for all 11 departments right now, and collected this. It goes back to the executive board, and they have to have a final decision on that. And afterwards, we will have the policy in place, but we still will have a working group that hammers out the details of the accounting part, for example, because we will have an internal climate fund. So there will be payments, and it's very a bureaucratic process on how to put these payments into place, and from which source, and also the effort that's behind that. So there's a lot of concern about this. So it's really a mix of participation, like, but also a top-down decision process. So I hope this answers your question.
Yeah, great work. Yeah, we experienced also a same struggle with our travel ABC. We call it our ABC: avoid, book an alternative, and compensate your emissions. We had our first ABC ready in 2017, and then it took us 2 years to get it approved, and we had to leave out our targets. So now we have an ABC, but we have a framework agreement. I'm very happy that we have a framework agreement, and they have to deliver data to us. So if we hope that we cannot make it compulsory. So we hope that most of the people choose for the travel agency that the VUB appointed, because it's much easier. It's a direct invoicing. They have no administration to do. So we really worked on nudging people towards that framework agreement, but then COVID came. And we're really happy that our travel agency survived the crisis until now. And now we are waiting for the people to book and to use the ABC, because we could not test it yet because no one traveled during 2 years. And next step for us is try again to have targets set. That's really a pity that we had to leave it away, but it was before COVID, so nobody could think how life would change, and hybrid conferences would be as good, almost as good as live conferences. So we will try again, but first we will have some students doing research, and they will work on both the data of 2020 and 2021 to see, okay, how much reduction did we have in business travel? And then also compare it to the sense of having access to knowledge. So to see if there was a kind of impact factor, okay, our climate impact diminished by, for example, 90%, but our access to knowledge only diminished by that percent. So they're trying to put, we're looking for students and professors and research teams to work on that topic to really show that it was possible to have a big reduction and still have positive, or less negative impact on research. So that's now our next step towards targets at VB.
Rebecca, just to kind of build on some points that Catherine raised, and actually I think this goes back to a point that Julia raised at the start of the session about kind of who has ownership and about kind of partnership working. I think, you know, in my experience at Edinburgh, Scope 1 and 2 is pretty clear in terms of who has responsibility, but for Scope 3 that involves a lot more in terms of stakeholder engagement internally. And just kind of one example of that, just touching on business travel. So our new sustainable travel policy, that is owned by our department. We are the main sponsor, but that works hand in hand with a new expenses policy that is owned by finance. And that works hand in hand with a new travel management company, which is owned by procurement. And I have to say, it's been delightful to work with colleagues, but also rather challenging in terms of making sure all these changes align. And we've already published our new travel policy. We've had to delay the rollout of our new management company by a month, and the expenses policy, even though it's been approved, has still not been published. So I think one kind of learning for me in terms of Scope 3 and just looking at my experience with business travel, it requires a lot of really proactive stakeholder engagement just to make sure everything is aligned and make sure people know roles and responsibility. But also going back to Julia's point, who actually has the data that you require? And when we talk a lot about the kind of the pillars of Scope 3, it means we have to go out with our sustainability departments and engage with other colleagues in states, finance, procurement, etc. And that does take time. So I think there's kind of opportunities for partnership work, but there's also challenges with that.
Go ahead, Catherine.
Well, thank you, Matthew, for raising this point. This was also my immediate thought earlier on when you mentioned that you have an engagement going on in the field of construction. And this is something which is, totally makes sense. And we would love to do that. But at the same time, what I feel when it comes to Scope 3 and sustainability management, we very often struggle that we are the units that are interfering in other units' businesses. And so for us, we also would have an extra department responsible for that. And since it comes with like huge regulations anyways, they are not very mean of getting some on top of that. So if we have the chance time-wise for you to go into that engagement process in this construction field, I would be very interested in that. And also if you received a mandate from leadership to do that, or if it's just on a good basis with colleagues that it just works out. So how's that going for you?
Yeah, very happy to share briefly, Catherine. I think there's a number of factors that has allowed us to have this kind of positive engagement with the construction firms. So first of all, buy-in from senior management in the States. The director is very much a key supporter of the work that we do, and he owns part of the climate strategy. So the climate strategy is overseen by our department, but has devolved ownership across different units. So having senior management buy-in allows us a way in with that. Secondly, we also used the driver of community benefits as well. So instead of just coming at it from a purely kind of climate point of view, we use the leverage of our community plan, which specifically identifies an objective to work with suppliers to deliver community benefits for local organisations, etc., across Edinburgh and the regions. And that really tapped into the conscience of the construction firms that we were engaging with. And as I said before, a lot of them already had dedicated teams working on this. They were ahead of what we were doing. So we had senior management buy-in. We also said, we're not just doing this for kind of climate purposes, but community benefits. And luckily, the two main construction firms that we were engaging with were very receptive to that. I have to say, though, it does require a lot of kind of bridge building in terms of actually putting some staff resource into that. And you do need to start from our experience, top down. So getting senior management to engage with their senior management, then you have the buy-in, and then that feeds down into kind of that middle management where a lot of the decision-making processes you can really tap into. I have to say as well, I think there's also peer pressure from the sector. You know, the public sector and especially universities are very big customers of these construction companies. And it wasn't just us going to these construction companies in isolation. You know, you had St Andrews, you had Glasgow, you had Aberdeen, all asking very similar things. So I think if you could apply your pressure as a sector, that definitely has an influence, certainly. So yeah, just some thoughts from me in terms of how we went about engaging.
Thank you, Matthew. Go ahead.
Just
Björn.
make a few comments. I'll comment on the last thing first in terms of stakeholder and so on, because we're trying, I would say it's something new for us at least. Starting from August last year, we have a vice rector that specifically has climate, environment, and interdisciplinarity as her areas. And I think that is going to help tremendously with the work going ahead, because then it's very, very clear where, you know, you have one person at the top who is interested in following this up and can push on the units further down. Other than that, in terms of travel and so on, we will try the kind of mild way here, trying to encourage people and so on, without, you know, requiring too much, but very clear expectations. We've had this for a while, but then going back to this travel agency again, the way it used to be, it was a nightmare to order train travels, for example. So we ended up having to do that yourself outside the system. But then we changed travel agency, and I tried this for the first time this fall, where I was going to another city in Norway, and it was really streamlined experience, going by train one way, hotel, and then I had to fly back for private reasons. Completely streamlined, very easy. So no difference between ordering a train and a plane, essentially. And I think that is part of, you know, the solution here in terms of getting people to actually do this, to make, you know, any threshold as small as possible whatsoever. And then I just mentioned that Katrin said you had a 50% aim, and that is what we have as well. You saw on my slides that 7% per year, but if you do that 7% per year compared to the last one until 2030, you end up at 50%, which is of course why we chose 7% in the first place. So we're very well aligned there. Whether it's realistic, that's something else, but we'll try. But yeah, one final thing as well. I saw in your slides you had this that 80% was the long hauls on plane, and that is also what we see. We had a lot of discussions about using train for shorter distances, but when you break this down, you see that the international flights going outside Europe, that's really the large part here, and you're not going by train to China, Brazil, I think. So there you just have to reduce the number of travels, and that will be very difficult.
We have 45 minutes left. Can we conclude on business travel and go to the next topic? Yeah, but maybe, yeah, Julia, do you have any topic? As you said, we are in the start of collecting Scope 3 data. Is there any topic on which you would like us to exchange next? Go ahead.
So maybe we can, the idea was mentioned here before that we maybe talk about the most important Scope 3 emissions for us, or maybe what we should target priorly, because for Scope 3, so as University of Vienna, so it's our first carbon footprinting now, and we have kind of a tool already, which was established by an alliance in Austria, and they have given us some information about what should be included in Scope 3, and it's kind of narrow, Scope 3. So included would be business travel, for example, it's paper and IT, like mobile phones, notebooks. But there's no laboratory inventory included, and I think many more things like constructing or purchasing. So it's really a narrow Scope 3, and we are aware of that. But for us, it's just a start. So we have to start somewhere, and even those things will be kind of hard to determine for the first year. But maybe we can establish some categories we think that are important, or maybe some categories that should be included, or if there's any experience from other universities, for example, what scope 3 emissions are highest at their university, it would be good to know. Because if you say, for example, paper is just smaller than 1%, that would be interesting to know. So maybe not just one. I don't really have one specific scope or topic, but maybe we could elaborate a bit on most important ones, if there's any experience in this group.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to say a few words because this is also our first carbon footprint analysis, and in fact, first things that we benchmarked. So we looked a little bit around, and we got the feeling that clearly business travel was a huge determinant in the analysis, and of course scope 1 and scope 2 through the energy. So it was mandatory for us to include that, especially that we need to provide data-based analysis to our senior management so that we can propose any sustainable policies. So we need to work on that. We had the chance to have a mobility analysis for commuting just before, in February 2020. So it was easy. And for business travel, as I explained, it's line by line, and we try to do that. And what we think it's also to try to include procurement. For us, it was important because this is clearly big figures. When you look at benchmarking, there are not a lot of universities which published their analysis that put a procurement, but when it's in, you see that the figures are huge. And so we decided to include that, but because it's very difficult, that's what we will do with the VBeyond does, is that it's really an economic approach based on accounting data and trying to match categories or commodities with emission factors and try to see what it makes. But also what we had difficulties, it's also to determine some part of the scope. For example, I think we're atypical, but for example, for housing residencies for students, we do not own them, but we are the middle, in between, we just find rentals and we sub-rent and we rent it back to the students. So we do not own anything, but even in our books, we don't see it because it's a plus minus and it's compensated. And we do not know. We discuss with other organizations who say that you just try to compute what you put in your books, what you own, what you have controls on. And for others, you say, if we were not here, there will be no residencies. So clearly the impact is ours. But it's really difficult to determine what is important to include or not, and we have many questions that I think we reserve for the future, but that really we think that if we want to be comprehensive and really show quite an interesting picture of our carbon footprint, we need to include them. That's the same stuff for the canteen. We do not own them. That's a governmental department that do that for high schools and the university. And we need to know if we get information, because again, if we are not here, there will be no canteens. So we need to include them, I think, but it's not in our books, and it's just a control, and that's it. So for me, determining the scope of the perimeter, just to change the wording, it's very important because it may change completely the picture. And when you make pie chart and you have a part of it which is not included, I think your really relative weight of your scopes doesn't reflect at least the full reality.
That's true. Mm-hmm. In our first carbon footprint, we've also taken our paper use as a first step to procurement. And then it also, it was not visible in the pie chart because it was less than 0.01%. And then we 2 years later. We only do the carbon footprint every 2 years, not every year, because we don't have a smooth data processing. It's also something to work on at VUB. And then we decided to demand all the procurement data, and then it were millions and millions and millions of euros spent. And then we realized, okay, we'll just use the monetary ratio, just that people start to realize there is a big possible impact there, but we could not go in detail yet to define more subcategories. We will try now. We are working with our new methodology now with science-based targets, which is quite strict on what to take into account and what not. And now we will try to distinguish, like on services, spendings on services, spending on laboratory devices, spending on ICT spendings. But then it's like millions of euros, and it will be hard to have enough detail. Or you have to work line by line, as Laurent mentioned, for the business travel. So yeah, now we choose to show the big spendings just to make people aware of it. But no, I don't know. There's no silver bullet.
Rebecca, just on that, it's a really interesting question about where do you start? And certainly we have discussed two approaches at the university to how do we actually improve our data around scope 3. And I think it boiled down to kind of two key approaches. That the first one was, identifying priority areas. For ourselves, that was obviously business travel, but following the exercise with the kind of the HESKIT tool that I referred to earlier on, it was looking at kind of labs, construction, computer and IT infrastructure, estates, kind of business services, so maintenance, and also investments. Within the UK, a number of universities have endowment funds, and certainly that has been a big focus in terms of our student stakeholders over the last year. So there's that approach, but also there's another approach that I think is a very valuable approach if you've got limited kind of internal resource, and that's maybe engaging with the existing top suppliers. So either by kind of estimated carbon emissions or spend, and then you can kind of work directly with those suppliers to maybe improve the quality of the data. That might take a long time, and that's what we have found engaging with smaller to medium-sized suppliers. They've been a lot more agile to change their systems to improve the quality of the data. So certainly in conversation with colleagues, it's those two approaches in terms of how to determine next steps. It's either kind of looking at your priority areas of spend or engaging with the kind of the big hitters in terms of your suppliers. It's just a couple of approaches you could adopt.
Can I maybe just ask real quick, University of Oslo, because you had in your presentation the scope emissions, scope 3 emissions a bit more detailed. Is this something that is published? Because I think it would be great, even when I talk to colleagues or management, to say or to show them what other universities are doing or how their carbon footprinting looks like. But I find it quite hard to find published information. And I think actually a colleague of mine told me once that University of Oslo has quite good carbon footprinting, but I couldn't find the information then online. So I was just wondering if that's something that is published actually.
It is there, but unfortunately the reports and so on are all in Norwegian, and the web pages are all in Norwegian as far as I know. So I mean, it's possible to interpret some of the charts and so on, but it's a bit difficult to maybe grasp all the details. I think that is something that we have to discuss now. Once we adopt this strategy, we'll make an English version of that, and I think we also have to work on the English web pages, because of course we have a lot of PhD students and postdocs and so on who don't understand Norwegian, and it should be available to all of them as well.
That would be great,
yeah. But I think that will be some months ahead before we have it. But there's I can send a link afterwards. There's this accounting for 2020, and then you can at least have a look at the charts and so on there and get maybe some idea. Because what you will see is, I guess, a follow-up to Matthew here. It's not just where you start, but where do you stop? because when you start digging into this, you get all these categories that are, you know, between 0 and 1% of the whole thing. And does it really, you know, can you do anything with it? Okay, you know, but then what? Kind of. And I got the same impression. One of the other universities in Norway did a really detailed study on food in the canteens, digging down into all the details. And it's sort of, and then what? What do you do? It's so much work that you can't start updating this every year and so on. So it's, you know, they also, I think they just realized that this was too detailed. They had to go up at least a couple of levels before it's something like I can use.
Yeah, it's good you mention food, because at our university it's the same. It's also a very tiny percentage, and we do own our own canteens, so we can measure everything and we do have possible impacts. But it's such a tiny percentage, but everybody likes to eat and everybody likes these university canteens. It's smaller than 1%, but still we take it into account because it's a very popular topic. And because the stakeholders, every time you ask how will you lower your carbon footprint, they come up with waste and eating vegan. So we take it into account just because the students like it and because we can act on it. So it's also, yeah, it's not scientific at all, but it's, yeah, also it's also a participatory thing, making a climate strategy. Thank you for sharing the link. Matthew is taking notes of the discussion. So maybe after the session, everybody has each other's emails. We can collect the links already in the chat here, but we can also, if you have extra links for the report, even if they are in Norwegian or German, there's a good translation tools on the internet, so don't hesitate to share if they are publicly available. That would be great. I'm checking. Is there any category we want to dive more in detail for the last half hour we have, or do we want to focus more on the process or on how to make the data collection in the future easily? Because I hear a lot of you have the ambition to have a yearly calculated carbon footprint. If I see how much work it is at VEB, for us it's not possible. So I would like to hear, how do you process that data?
And I also have specific questions in terms of what you will do in terms of these factors and so on, because the way we've done it now, we are completely dependent on one of these consultants that have a library of the division factors and so on, and they have to do the conversion for us. So it costs us a bit of money every year doing this. So I don't know if people are doing it in some other way, or if you know some, you know, kind of open access versions of this and so on. So it would be kind of nice to be able to do this ourselves without having to pay these consultants every year. But for now, we don't really see a solution for this.
We also work with consultants.
I think in Austria, we have this information through the Federal and Environmental Agency. So I think there is some data that you can get for free, but of course I don't know for other countries if it's similar.
Yeah, just to kind of build on that point from a kind of Scottish perspective, we can easily access the conversion factors from the UK government, so they publish annually. But for us, it's just the time it takes to actually do the calculations. So we've gone out to Ecometrica, who's an external consultant, and we use their kind of Our Impacts platform, and we just put in the raw sustainability data. All the calculations are done in that platform and outputs the carbon emission factors. But there's been a lot of discussions across the sector in the UK about developing a sector-specific tool or looking at a tool that we can modify for the sector, because the majority of universities, as far as I'm aware, that I talk to, all use external consultants just because it saves time, but the costs are significant. So I think, you know, in the long term, we would love to have something that's open source, that's available, and that many colleagues use, because just now everyone's using different consultants. Some are even still doing it in-house, and it is challenging.
So Matthew, do you use your consultant only for calculating the emissions, or is it a broader project, so for strategic measures as well, or is it just for entering the data?
Yeah, it's just to help us with our kind of greenhouse gas accounting. It's just the data. But one thing we're actually looking into at the moment is looking at wider environmental, social and governance data. Because we have a really good relationship with Ecometrica. It's been very helpful. They've allowed us to make a lot of our data open source to staff and students for research. But one thing now is our kind of remit expands from just the environmental to more kind of social and civic responsibility. How can we have one platform that basically is the hub of all this information? So that's one thing we're talking with Ecometrica about. But just now it's very much just based on the greenhouse gas accounting.
I just put in the chat a link to Exiobase, which is a monetary table that provides a lot of free information depending on where you source your goods and services. So it's extremely complex to use, but once you master it, you can really build up, in fact, your life analysis of this product and determine where it was produced, how it was shipped, etc. And you can, if you want, we try to use that to provide for some goods that we purchase for which there is a high volume, to provide carbon information, so that it's an additional information and not only focused on cost and budget, so that people that have information and compare. It's the first step for a real, I would say, triple capital accounting that we plan to introduce at some point.
Thank you so much. And I think, Matthew, were you referring to the data of the DEFRA, of the emission factors that DEFRA is producing online? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's also, I used it in the past before we switched to our consultant. That's also a good database. Maybe in the report we can make a list of all the databases we know that have open access.
Just a quick remark on DEFRA. We have a travel agent that reports on DEFRA and GHG figures, and in fact they are quite different. So I think you need to understand the methodology behind, because figures are very, very different.
I can say this was based on discussion with our external consultants again. We also got some measures from our previous travel agency in terms, and they basically told us to multiply them by a factor of roughly 2, because they are very conservative in terms of the emissions that report.
So is there any other topic on which we would like to dive in deeper in our last 20 minutes?
It's probably more of a question for me, and that's on investments. Now, I don't know if it's a slightly different situation within the UK context, but a number of kind of older universities have endowment funds. So looking to kind of invest in various sectors, I really used to use the fund as a bit of a safety net and reinvest into the university. Oxford, Cambridge in the UK have the biggest endowment funds. Edinburgh's third, round about kind of 400 million. But I think really due to kind of pressure from students, they wanted us to divest from fossil fuels. We were one of the first to do that. And subsequently, every year, we are now analysing our carbon footprint of our investments and really being kind of proactive in managing that and trying to align that with our carbon neutral target by 2040. So I just thought I'd kind of pose a question. I know within the UK, I know in North America especially, that's a growing area now, you know, a lot of pressure on Harvard, Yale, etc. I don't know if that's maybe slightly different in terms of European universities in terms of public funding, but for us, certainly that's a major thing that we're now considering and will be part of the new climate strategy.
Well, I can just add that we also have funds that are invested, and we went fossil free in 2019, also part of this European Green Capital push, where it was the different charters that companies and institutions could sign, and we managed to get out of it then. I don't think we're really measuring in any detail the carbon footprint related to the investments, but at least they are 100% fossil free as of now. And that is also, I would say that the students have been pushing us for a while before 2019 to do this.
We started, that there are also the students pushing on divestment, and we are not fossil free yet, but we're only a few percentages away from that goal, because they did not want to break up every existing fund and bonds. They just wanted to wait until it ended the lifespan and then reinvest in a fossil-free fund. So it took some years, but I think we're nearly there. But thanks to the new European EU taxonomy, the new legislation, we hope to get better data on the carbon impact of the funds we have, because now we already asked 2 years to our different bankers managing our funds to report on the climate impact of our funds, and some could really well and other didn't even understand the question. So we really hope with that European legislation coming up this year that it's thorough enough to have new data in these funds, and it will also help to have data driven and maybe go quicker in this investment. Are any other universities working on investments?
Not really working on investments. So there is, in Germany, we do not have endowments or anything like that of the scope that you have in Britain or in North America. So the funds that are invested are quite small in any case. And then there's a quite strict regulation by the Berlin Senate that has to be followed anyways. But still, we are looking at the topic of investment in terms of, so there's a overall discussion going on in Germany also that everyone who's working in public sector is building up a retirement account, which is centrally managed. And so those are millions. And of course, there is a movement that there should be a divestment taking place, but this is something that is externally managed, so not by the individual universities. But there is this awareness, there's this drive to head towards this, because that's where the millions are. And so additionally, at our university, we have discussions about changing also the bank that we are working with. Those are not very on the forefront at the moment, I have to admit, of course. But these are ideas that we are, of course, taking up and bringing forward to the financial department.
I'm happy to hear that there are discussions arising also about the pensions. In the full divestment discussion a few years ago, there were some pension funds indeed starting with divestment, but then the discussion doesn't live anymore that hard, I thought. But I read now that also in Edinburgh, There are questions rising. I hear it in Berlin, so it would be great that it rises on the agenda again. Okay. Do we have any other topics? The last but not least, yeah, go ahead, Katrien.
Yeah, maybe it's slightly off topic, and it's certainly controversial, but still I wanted to raise it because I discussed with colleagues in Leuven and in Zurich. Is any one of you also considering, so talking about scope 3, we're essentially talking about the footprint of emissions. But of course, our universities are so much more than just emitting CO2. We are also working on those other big pillars like research and teaching. And so there's also an argument by some to talk about the handprint and assessing this. So for example, if you have a dedicated sustainability curriculum or yeah, stuff like that along those lines. So is there, and here in this discussion, it's not about minimizing the footprint there, but just also looking at the handprint. So what is like the positive output of the university? So is that a discussion that you are having at your universities, and how do you go about it if you do?
Well, I can start perhaps, and basically we're just talking about it, not trying to quantify it or measure it in a way. But of course we say that, you know, the most important thing we do is to educate the people. That will be part of this new green economy and the green industry and so on, and will do the changes in society. So we try to have that, you know, as a thought, but not connected directly and not sort of trying to say that that is a countermeasure towards not reducing on climate gas emissions. So I think there's a little bit of discussion, but it's not really, we're not coupling the two in a major way, not yet at least.
Yeah, by coincidence, I asked the question this morning to our consultant if we could, as carbon removals, use our the negative impact on emissions thanks to our innovation or our research, and that's not allowed in the framework we use. Of course, it's not allowed, but indeed, it will probably be a discussion or a conversation coming up while making a climate action plan. I think philosophically you have to divide both, that we need to raise our positive impact while decoupling our positive impact by our research and education from our material impact by having our operations.
Funny enough, in our university, that's the opposite, is that we were focusing only on the positive impact. So outreach, research, what we do on PVs. We are creating a new interdisciplinary center based on environmental systems, etc. So starting to discuss about how to relate our research project with the AGDs. So really creating a report focusing on what we do and how we innovate in this area. And in fact, I personally ask also that we consider the negative impacts as well. So because when we produce innovation, you also create negative impacts, right? We discussed, Rebecca, on sustainable labs, for example, at some point, etc. So there are a lot of things that we need at least inventorize and measure, and of course put in relation to what we do positively. So that was in fact my initial fear, is that we just say we are good. Of course we do good. We are at the service of society, but we do not see the cost, and again make the cost benefit ratio. Again, traveling, as we discussed, is good because we need to do it, but we need to know how much it costs to the society and to the planet. That's it. So that's, for example, the only real thing that we do in terms of climate policy is really to list the positive projects.
And do you also quantify the positive impact?
No, that's the problem. We think that we are good, but how to prove that? No, again, it's true that it would be nice also to, for those who have an impact on our campus, to try to internalize the positive impacts and put them as a compensation for negative impacts, but we cannot do it. So at the moment is really to show that we are active. You know, we're the only university in Luxembourg, so that's also a good way to show a good reputation, attract money, and develop attractiveness for students and researchers. But it lacks really data and measurements, KPIs, etc.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah.
Can I just ask to Belen, have you started discussing how do you want to measure this? Because I mean, there's few projects where you can do this to some extent, but at least when you move into more sort of, say, law or social science and so on, how do you measure this? It might be really important for, you know, inclusion and a just transition and so on, but extremely hard to measure.
Yeah, and I think you're always on the brink of greenwashing. So this is like it's really a complicated and also controversial issue. It's just, you know, that when I talk to other colleagues in international networks, it seems to be a topic popping up and people are thinking about it. And I think what Laurent mentioned is, or like also everyone else of us, we are also we need to be committed on also focusing on what is working well. Also, so what is our input into that, and and then just have those emission reports standing there for some people as a communication tool is sometimes a little bit counterproductive. So this is something that we are thinking about, like how to communicate and how that putting that together. And well, I was checking if for all the German speakers, or if you want to try it, I don't know if you can switch the website to English. If you go to the German Environmental Agency, there is an emissions calculator where you can actually, as an individual, calculate your footprint. And what they are doing, and I think that's a very clever approach on how to go about this, is they're asking you, do you have a car? What kind of food do you eat and everything? So you still get your output, like 11 tons, for example, which would be the standard for a German citizen. But at the same time, in parallel, they would consider that you tick that you're vegan and that you tick that you don't have a car. They don't subtract that from the emissions that you have. So, and I think that's vital, that this is not taking off anything of the bad that you're doing, but it shows you at the same time. So what did you avoid? So what is your positive handprint? And this is a communication option that I find quite interesting. And since we're talking about like the universities as a whole, and I think most of our universities apply a whole institution approach to sustainability, but when it comes to emissions, we're really very clearly focusing on those operations part. And sometimes I feel, okay, we are forgetting about the rest that there's done, but how to put it together without, minimizing or diminishing the emission impact that we are having, because I'm not interested in greenwashing here, definitely not.
One way of trying to include that is to develop with research projects that would impact the campus. So we try to showcase innovation on the campus whenever we can. And of course, positive impacts here could be subtracted if we want to our negative impacts. So that's a way to benefit, of course, and to communicate, disseminate, also show to the country and the society what we do, and also operationally to get positive impacts. That's one way that we try to propose. And of course, good thing is that it engages a lot more the researchers because it provides them the opportunity to not to publish papers, but also to show that the innovation works.
I could just add, I just realized that we actually we are doing some of the same now, because we have this, what we call an integrated climate and environmental strategy. So the numbers I showed you and so on, that is part of the greenhouse gas emission, which is 1/5 roughly of this full strategy, which goes on. It also covers research and education, kind of more organization, outreach and innovation and so on. So we are doing a whole package here, but we're not quantifying the other parts of it in any way. We're just, as you say, stating that we're contributing best nationally and to the global scene as well.
Well, just one thing regarding that. We have one project where we are trying to map our research to the SDGs, and that could be kind of a process on how to, think about a footprint, because then you have, for example, 5% of our research deals with SDGs, so and so. So maybe that's a way on how to quantify it, because we are also so we are not openly discussing about a footprint or a handprint, or maybe naming it handprint, but we are discussing things like, so how can we quantify our impact in teaching and research? And maybe that's a little step towards it. I'd have to check how the project is going, because I heard it's kind of difficult as well, but maybe that's one thing to consider.
This is also something that we have been doing for the past years, and it's really difficult. So we're doing this for our courses and research projects. And there we have over 4,000 courses per semester, and evaluating that with an indicator set is really, it's a challenge, because you have to apply both qualitative and quantitative indicators for that. So it's not done with just having a keyword research or something like that. So yeah, so maybe this is also a topic that we could change on another time, but just to mention that.
Yeah, indeed. I heard some topics during the session to exchange on future session, but indeed the SDG mapping and, for example, the THE impact that is passing along worldwide, I think it's also worth a separate session and on everybody's experience on that. We have 2 minutes left. Is there any super urgent theme to discuss? Is there any team that needs an urgent new session that came up? We have sessions on staff and student engagement coming up, on sustainable IT. Help me, Laura. What are the other sessions?
So let me check. So tomorrow we will have another session about education for sustainable development, and then the week starting 21 February, student and staff engagement, sustainable IT, and then we will have a sort of starter session about developing a climate strategy and targets. So this was more meant for newcomers, people who is in the first steps of the process.
Thank you, Laura. So I think some of the topics written here will also reappear in the next session. And I think for Matthew and you and Ines and me who are facilitating the sessions, we will also look through our notes we've taken, also to define some key topics for the future, and come back to you to have a kind of prioritizing for future sessions. I think that will maybe be the easiest way to work. That we first go for the total of 6 sessions, and then go to the agenda for the next round. Thank you so much. It was really a pleasure to have this meeting. It was super interesting. I learned a lot. I hope.
Thank you very much, Rebecca, for facilitating.
You're welcome. Sorry for the fuzzy start. And I hope to see you soon in a future session, and I wish you all a very pleasant afternoon. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.